He opened the doors of his kingdom to save a desperate mother and her foals, but this act of pure compassion was what ironically triggered the most brutal betrayal and a battle for his own survival. If stories about the power of compassion resonate with you, subscribe to the channel to continue this journey together. The icy wind of the Sierra Madre cut Nahkoz's skin, a foreboding whisper that mixed with the echo of gunshots. Pressed against the vertical wall of the canyon, he didn't dare look. At the men below, dark silhouettes moving like predators in the gloom. The smell of gunpowder and dust filled his nostrils, but his attention was fixed on something else, the terrified eyes of the mare. She trembled, her slender body as tense as a bowstring, protecting the two foals, nestled against her legs. Every bullet that whizzed by and ricocheted off the rock just inches from them was a cruel reminder of the price of his decision. He extended his hand slowly, not for a weapon, but to the animal's neck, a silent gesture of calm amidst the absolute chaos. In that instant he was not a warrior, but the guardian of a promise that now threatened to consume all that was left of his world. A voice shouted in Spanish rose from the bottom of the gorge, cruel and triumphant, promising fire and death. It was the voice of Colonel Morales, a sound that had become synonymous with extermination. Nahkoz felt the weight of his people's gazes, hidden in the shadows of the crevices, an entire community depending on the loyalty of a frightened animal and the courage of a broken man. He could feel the trembling of the mare's heart through the palm of his hand, a frantic beat that mirrored his own. She trusted him, and that trust was both his only weapon and his greatest vulnerability. Looking at the almost invisible goat trail that climbed the escarpment, a path that defied gravity itself, he understood the devastating irony of his situation. The same compassion that had made him feel alive again had cornered him on the brink of annihilation, forcing him into an impossible gamble for everyone's survival. The memory hit him with the force of a blow, as vivid as the cold rock on his back. It hadn't been many moons ago. He had found her not far from there, amidst the smoking wreckage of a small farm. The smell was not of gunpowder, but of ashes and despair. Her owners, Spanish settlers, lay where they had fallen, victims of the same brutality that now hunted them. The mare, with an ugly gash on her flank and bloodshot eyes full of dread, was the only living soul, besides the two trembling beings that could barely stand on their legs. Nahkoz had seen in her a mirror of his own people, cornered, wounded, but fiercely protective of their future. The promise was not made with words, but with the gesture of cleaning her wound and guiding her to the safety of the canyon. It was this trail, the trail of an animal that did not belong to those mountains, that Morales's men had followed like vultures. The sound of boots dragging on the gravel below broke his trance. They were coming up. There was no more time for hesitation. Nahkoz did not pull the makeshift reins. Instead, he turned to the mare, touching his forehead to hers, whispering ancient words that spoke of wind, stone, and spirit. They were the same words his ancestors used to calm the storms. Then he took the first step on the narrow path, a trail that was little more than a crack in the mountainside. He didn't look back, placing all his faith in the connection they had forged in fire and fear. For an agonizing second, she remained motionless, her body rigid. One of the foals neighed, a thin, desperate sound. In response, the earth beneath her hooves gave way slightly, sending a cascade of small stones into the abyss, a fatal announcement of their position. The sound of the falling stone was the sentence. A cry of triumph echoed from below, followed by the flash of a gunshot. The bullet cracked, the air chipping away at the rock inches from the mare's head. Terror overcame paralysis. With a sharp whinny, she lunged forward, her iron hooves, a mark of her old world, scraping and sliding dangerously on the bare stone. The noise was a deafening alarm, betraying every step of their desperate escape. The foals, unstable and terrified, stumbled behind her. Nahkoz flattened himself against the canyon wall, his heart hammering against his ribs as the mare's large body passed him on the trail so narrow it barely seemed able to support a man, let alone a panicked family. The abyss to his left was a dark mouth, promising a quick end to any mistake. Progress was agonizingly slow. With each hesitant step from the mare, with every slip of a foal, the sounds of the pursuers grew closer, clearer. Nahkoz could hear the soldiers' panting breaths, the metallic click of their weapons against the rocks. He risked a look back and saw the first of them, his face stained with sweat and determination. Less than 20 meters below, the escape was becoming impossible. It was then that Morales' voice cut through the air again, not with a cry of anger, but with a cold, calculated order that froze Nahkoz's blood. "Don't shoot the Indian. I want the mare. She's worth a fortune." In that instant, the truth struck him like lightning. He wasn't the prey, he was the bait. His compassion had not only led them into a trap, it had turned him into the tool to capture the very being he had sworn to. Protect. The revelation hit him not like a bullet, but like a slow poison spreading through his veins. The cold he felt no longer came from the mountain wind, but from within. He looked at the mare, and for the first time, he did not see the refugee he had saved, but the golden shackle that bound him to that rock wall. The trust in her eyes, which had once strengthened him, now burned him like a mark of shame. Morales hadn't hunted him for being an Apache. He had used him for being human. Every gesture of kindness, every moment of connection with the animal had been one more step into the colonel's trap. Fury bubbled in his chest, a pure, icy rage that supplanted fear. He was not bait, he was not a tool, and that mare would not be anyone's prize. His eyes swept the path ahead, no longer looking for a way to salvation, but for one to sacrifice. And he found it. A few meters above, the trail narrowed even more, circling a pillar of sandstone weathered by time. On one side, the impassable wall, on the other, nothingness. It was a choke point, a place where the pursuit would have to stop or end in disaster. With a new and terrible determination, Nahkoz moved in front of the mare, blocking her path. He faced her, his gaze intense, and then turned and took a deliberate step back towards the approaching soldiers. He was positioning himself between the hunted and the hunters, turning his own body into the final obstacle. The mare stopped, confused and frightened, her large, valuable body now serving as a living shield for the man who had protected her. This act of sacrifice, where a man becomes the last line of defense, is chilling. Leave a comment of support for Nahkoz and subscribe to find out if his courage will be enough. The first soldier, a young man with a sweaty face and wide eyes, stopped a few steps away. The tip of his bayonet trembled, reflecting the pale light of the sky. He looked from Nahkoz to the massive flank of the mare and back to Nahkoz. Confusion and hesitation stamped on his face. The colonel's order echoed in his mind, but the reality of the situation was an impossible puzzle. Morales' voice thundered again, laden with impatience and cruelty. "What are you waiting for, you idiot? Push him! Use the butt of the rifle! Throw the savage into the abyss, but if you scratch the mare, I'll throw you in next!" The cold bayonet of reality pressed the soldier, who took a hesitant step forward, raising his weapon not to shoot, but to strike. Nahkoz didn't move. He just watched, his dark eyes promising that if he fell, he would not fall alone. It was the mare who acted first. The sudden movement of the soldier, the raised weapon, and the aggressive intent broke her fragile control. Animal panic, pure and overwhelming, took over. With a terrified neigh that tore through the air, she reared back, trying to retreat from the approaching danger. Her heavy body collided with Nahkoz. The impact was brutal, unexpected, an involuntary betrayal born of fear. The force of the blow stole his breath and balance, throwing him backward. His moccasin boots scraped the edge of the rock, his heels dangling over the void. For a second, suspended in time, he felt the wind from the abyss pulling him down. the world tilting at an impossible angle. The shield he had created had become the sledgehammer that would sentence him to death. Time distorted. In his fall, the warrior's instinct prevailed over the shock. His fingers scratched at the smooth rock, desperately seeking a ledge, a crevice, anything that could stop his journey into the void. There was nothing. But then something whipped across his face, the rawhide rein he himself had braided. In a reflex that was pure will to live, his hand closed around it. The jolt nearly dislocated his shoulder, a shooting pain that snatched him from the air. He hung there, swinging gently, the abyss a hand's breadth from his boots. Above him, the weight of the mare was his only anchor, the source of his near death, now his only fragile hope of life. The soldiers froze, their weapons forgotten, watching the impossible scene unfold. The mare's panic turned to confusion. She felt the dead weight pulling her head down, a strange and alarming pressure. Her first instinct was to get rid of it, to back away, which would have made her lose her balance and drag them both to their deaths. A new cascade of loose stones rained down in the tense silence. But then she stopped, slowly, with a movement that seemed to defy animal nature itself. She turned her head as far as she could. Her large, dark eye met his. In that chasm between life and death, the fear in her gaze was replaced by something else, something ancient and deep: recognition. Instead of fighting, she dug in her hooves, her body trembling with effort, leaning her weight inward against the mountain. She was no longer running, she was holding on. For him. The silence of the canyon was broken not by a gunshot, but by a harsh, incredulous laugh from below. It was Morales. He didn't see a miracle of loyalty, but a business opportunity. He finally understood. The animal was not just valuable, it was loyal, and that loyalty had a master. "Don't let him fall, you useless fools," the colonel's voice echoed, whipping the paralyzed soldiers. "Pull him up. Pull him up now. The Indian comes with the mare." The order was so absurd, so contrary to everything they had been told, that the men just blinked. Save the enemy? The savage they had hunted for days? The irony was as sharp as the wind. Nahkoz's life, which moments before was worthless, had suddenly become the key to another man's fortune. The young soldier, the same one who had hesitated with the bayonet, was the first to recover from the shock. Under the furious gaze of his colonel, he cautiously knelt at the edge of the trail, extending his hand. It was a hand that trembled, not from fear, but from the surreality of the situation. Nahkoz looked up, at the enemy's outstretched fingers, and then at the mare, whose entire body vibrated with the effort of holding him. With one last breath, he used his remaining strength to swing his body, reaching the rock with his free hand. The soldier's hand gripped his wrist with desperate strength. Another joined in, and together, in a grotesque and silent effort, the hunters dragged their prey back from the edge of the abyss, depositing him, panting and wounded, back on the narrow path. He was not saved. He was captured, and the mare, his protector, was now his jailer. The soldier's rough hands turned him over, and the rawhide rope cut into his wrists, binding him with brutal finality. Nahkoz didn't fight. The strength had drained from his body, replaced by the cold weight of defeat. He remained on his knees on the narrow path, dust clinging to his sweat, and watched as Colonel Morales finally reached the plateau. The man did not look at him. His eyes, gleaming with greed, were fixed on the mare. He approached the animal with a presumptuous familiarity, running a hand over its trembling flank. "Ah, yes," Morales murmured, his fingers tracing an almost invisible brand under the coat. "The Don's brand. I knew I'd recognize it." Only then did he turn, his smile widening into a sneer as he looked at Nahkoz on the ground. "You see, Indian? She was never yours to save. You were just the shepherd who brought my sheep back to the fold." The tip of a boot struck Nahkoz's ribs, a silent, painful order to get up. "Let's go," Morales said, his tone now purely business. "Take her down." He gestured with his chin toward the perilous path. The humiliation burned more than the pain. He, who had guided the mare to freedom, was now forced to lead her into a cage. He looked into the animal's eyes, trying to convey an apology that had no words, and took the first hesitant step. As Morales had predicted, the mare followed him, the foals stumbling behind. The descent was even more treacherous than the ascent. One of the foals slipped, its thin legs giving way for a moment, and the animal let out a whimper of panic. Morales clicked his tongue, annoyed. "These offspring are a nuisance," he growled to one of his men. "If they slow us down, you know what to do." Nahkoz's heart froze. He understood the new and terrible equation. His cooperation not only guaranteed the mare's life, but perhaps, just perhaps, that of her foals. The collar around his neck had just become unbearably tighter. Morales's threat hung in the air, more dangerous than the abyss itself. The fire of fury in Nahkoz died out, replaced by a protective ice. Every fiber of his being focused on a single task, ensuring the foals did not falter. He moved not as a prisoner, but as a shepherd on sacred ground. He positioned himself behind the weaker foal, using his own body as a living handrail, his hand hovering inches from its small flank, ready to support it at the slightest hesitation. He whispered to them, "No," longer with the ancient words of power, but with low, soothing sounds, a constant murmur against the clinking of weapons and the panting breaths of the soldiers. He was the guardian of their weakness, turning his own humiliation into a shield for the most innocent. When they finally reached the canyon floor, the safety of solid ground brought no relief, only a new form of prison. The setting sun painted the rock walls in shades of blood and gold. The soldiers, now more relaxed, formed a loose circle around them. Morales approached the mare again, this time with a rope in his hand. "Good work, shepherd," he said to Nahkoz, sarcasm dripping from every word. With practiced efficiency, he tied the rope around the mare's neck and then gave a short order. Two of his men came forward and rudely tied the foals to the mother's saddle with short ropes, turning the family into a single cargo unit. Nahkoz watched, helpless, and saw the exact moment the mare's spirit faltered. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with trust and fear, now held a new and terrible emotion, the resignation of a broken beast, remembering the whip and the saddle. "The rope goes on the Indian's neck now," Morales ordered, with the casualness of someone tying up a mule. A soldier obeyed, and the rough rope scraped Nahkoz's skin, linking him directly to the mare. He was forced to walk in front, the first link in a chain of humiliation. With every step, he felt the gentle tug of the mare behind him, a physical reminder of his failure. She followed him, not out of trust, but out of obedience to the rope, her tamed instinct resurfacing from the ashes of her freedom. The connection that had saved them on the mountain was now the chain that dragged them into captivity. The long shadows of late afternoon stretched before them, dark and without promise, and the only sound was the shuffling of feet and the dull thud of hooves on the desert floor. Darkness swallowed the canyon. When Morales finally ordered a halt, a fire was lit, its flames dancing and casting monstrous shadows on the rock walls. Nahkoz was tied to a gnarled mesquite bush without water or food, a forgotten postscript to the day's conquest. From his position, he watched. He watched the soldiers laughing and sharing a bottle of tequila. He watched the mare, whose legs had been tied so she could not flee, her head bowed in defeat. Morales, his face flushed from alcohol and the fire, approached him. "Do you know what your mistake was? Savage," he said, his voice thick, "you looked at this beast and thought it had a soul. It doesn't have a soul. It has a price." He spat near Nahkoz's feet. "And you, through your compassion, helped me set how high it is." Morales staggered away, back to the warmth of the fire in his drunken victory. Nahkoz raised his gaze to the mare, expecting to see the empty shell the colonel had described. But what he saw was something else. Under the flickering light, the mare lowered her head, not in submission, but to gently touch the muzzle of one of her foals, which was trembling with cold and fear. It was a silent gesture, a universe of tenderness contained in a single movement. In that instant, Morales's words turned to dust. A price could not measure loyalty, courage, or a mother's love. And Nahkoz's compassion had not been a mistake. It had been the recognition of a truth that men like Morales could never comprehend. The ember of fury in his chest, which he thought was extinguished, glowed again, silent and deadly. The night deepened. The soldiers' noise grew louder, their guards lower with each gulp of tequila. The sentry's attention was divided between the darkness and the promise of the next drink. Nahkoz, who had remained as still as a stone statue, began to move. They were tiny, imperceptible movements, a slight shift of the shoulder, a twist of the wrist. His eyes, sharpened by the darkness, had found a flaw, not in the rock or the trail, but in the lazy knot that bound his hands. And behind him, the mesquite bush was not just his anchor, it was an arsenal. He felt the tip of a broken branch, sharp as an obsidian knife, against the ropes that bound him. The plan began to form, not with the complexity of a battle strategy, but with the brutal simplicity of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The work began. Slow, methodical, agonizing. Nahkoz twisted his body, pressing the bonds against the sharp point of the branch. The friction was a silent torment, one fiber at a time, the sound muffled by the rustling wind and the soldiers' laughter. Each time the sentry turned in his direction, he froze, becoming a statue of shadows again. The pain in his wrists was a fire that kept him awake, focused. Then, with an almost inaudible snap, one of the ropes gave way. The relief was an electric wave. With a little more room to maneuver, he worked the knot with his fingers, undoing the soldier's haste and carelessness. Minutes that felt like an eternity later, his hands were free. He didn't move, except to clench and unclench his fists, feeling the blood return to them. His gaze was not on the fire, but on the sentry who was now walking away to relieve himself in the darkness, his silhouette outlined against the stars. He rose from the ground without a single sound, his body flowing from stillness to motion like water pouring over stone. The distance of 10 paces was covered in the time of 2 breaths. The sentry didn't even have time to turn around when Nahkoz's hand covered his mouth, cutting off any cry before it could be born. The other hand, quick as a snake, snatched the knife from the soldier's belt. There was no struggle. There was only a quick, silent end. Nahkoz lowered the heavy body to the ground, placing it in the deep shadows at the base of the canyon wall. The cold, heavy steel of the knife in his hand felt like an extension of his own will. He did not stop to savor the small victory. His eyes were already fixed on the mare, and he moved toward her, a shadow with a deadly purpose, ready to cut the last chains of his disastrous compassion. He approached the mare like a ghost emerging from the rock itself. Her muscles twitched under her coat as she sensed his presence, but his hand on her neck was a familiar touch, a silent request for trust. The soldier's blade was sharp. It cut the rope on her legs with a fibrous whisper, then the one binding her neck. He turned to the foals, a more delicate task. They stirred, the confusion and the scent of sudden freedom almost making them neigh, but the still and reassuring presence of their mother kept them quiet. In seconds, they were free. But freedom was a silent burden, for every step from then on would be on a knife's edge. Nahkoz knew that escape was not just a matter of cutting ropes. The sound of iron hooves on stone would be their death sentence. His gaze slid past the fire to the soldiers' own horses, tied and dozing a short distance away. A dangerous and brutal idea bloomed in his mind. Leaving the mare and foals hidden in the deepest darkness, with a gesture to remain still, he moved again, a predator circling the camp. He didn't need much, just a spark to ignite a panic. With 2 quick cuts, he freed the 2 front horses. Then, with the tip of the knife, he gave a sharp, painful prick to the lead animal's flank. The result was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The horse reared with a neigh of pain and fury that echoed like a gunshot in the night silence, dragging the other with it in a blind stampede. They thundered through the camp, hooves crushing supplies, kicking embers from the fire that flew like deadly stars. Morales's men jumped to their feet, stumbling over each other in the sudden darkness, shouting contradictory orders. The colonel's silhouette outlined against the spreading flames, his face a mask of impotent fury. It was the chaos he needed. Amid the shouts and the sound of fleeing horses, he returned. To the mare, a whisper of movement in the confusion, and with a gentle touch, guided her away from the pandemonium toward the deeper shadows of the canyon. The escape was a silent ballet in the darkness. The greatest danger was no longer the soldiers, but sound itself. The click of a hoof on a loose stone, the frightened whinny of a foal. Nahkoz moved in front, not as a prisoner, but as the spirit of the mountain, choosing each step with supernatural precision, his feet finding sand where there would be gravel, soft earth where there would be rock. The mare, sensing the urgency, kept the foals close, her body a barrier of silence and comfort, muffling their fears. Behind them, Morales's fury began to organize into search orders, but Nahkoz was not leading them into open ground. He was leading them to the mouth of a dry stream, a scar in the earth that was both a hiding place and a new, uncertain path to freedom. The stream bed was a gorge of sand and stone, a natural labyrinth that swallowed them in darkness. The sound of the soldiers' boots and Morales's angry shouts became more muffled, filtered by the winding walls. But the silence was a double-edged sword. Every step of the mare, every pebble displaced by a foal's hoof, sounded like an explosion in the still air. Nahkoz felt the cold sweat run down his back. He wasn't just running, he was trying to erase his tracks, to erase his very existence from that night. He stopped for a moment, his body tense, listening. One sound stood out from the rest, the methodical sound of men splitting up, one of them starting to descend into the same stream bed. A few turns away. The trap was closing again. Panic was an option, but panic led to death. Nahkoz looked up, not forward, but up at the dark walls that imprisoned them. His eyes, accustomed to deciphering the secrets of the night, found what he was looking for, a faint, almost imperceptible line, a fault in the rock that zigzagged upward. It was a bighorn sheep trail, a path no man in heavy boots would dare attempt in the dark. It was a suicidal gamble, especially with the foals. But staying in the stream was a certain death sentence. Without a word, he touched the mare's flank, a silent command. She understood. With a confidence that defied all logic, she turned to the almost vertical wall, and, with Nahkoz leading the way, planted her first hoof on the impossible climb to the stars. The climb was a silent torture, an inch gained at a time. The sound Nahkoz feared most was the metallic clang of the mare's horseshoes on the stone, a foreign sound that did not belong in that vertical world. He moved in front, his fingers and toes finding invisible holds, his body flattened against the rock like a lizard's. Behind him, the mare was a mass of trembling muscle, instinct fighting against the trust she placed in the man. It was one of the foals that almost condemned them. Its hind legs slipped, a sudden movement that made it yelp in fear. The mother reacted instantly, steadying it with her own body, but the slip sent a small cascade of gravel into the stream bed below. The sound was subtle, but in the stillness of the night, it was like a thunderclap. A single word rose from the darkness. There! The shout eliminated any hope of stealth. Now it was a race against the bullet. The first flash of a musket lit up the canyon face for a split second, turning them into perfect targets against the starry sky. The bullet cracked just a few hands. Breaths from one of the foal's heads, chipping off stone splinters that hit them like needles. The terror almost made the mare lose control, a movement that would have sent them all to their deaths. But Nahkoz did not retreat. On the contrary, he pressed his body against the mare's flank, a physical, urgent command. "Climb!" The pain in his whisper transformed the animal's panic into desperate strength. Driven by terror and the indomitable will of a single man, they clawed their way upward as more voices and the sound of weapons being prepared echoed from the abyss they were desperately trying to leave behind. A volley of muskets answered the cry. The air around them filled with deadly whizzes and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Splinters of rock rained down on them, cutting their skin. The mare, an immense and terrified target, pressed her body against the mountain, her muscles trembling violently. Any instinct to flee would have killed her. Nahkoz saw it a few meters above. A rocky ledge, a fold in the cliff face that would offer precarious but vital cover. There was no time for gentleness. With a guttural cry that was part command, part plea, he pushed the mare's flank, using his own body to force her up the last and most dangerous meters. He was no longer a guide. He was the very will of the mountain, moving with a desperate fury that transferred to the animal. They reached the ledge. At the exact moment, another hail of lead swept the spot where they had been seconds before. Crouched under the ledge, the sound of bullets hitting harmlessly on the rock above their heads was the sweetest music. The world was reduced to the sound of their burning lungs, of the mare's heart beating like a war drum against his back. As his breath began to return, Nahkoz turned to assess the damage. That's when he saw it. It wasn't a bullet wound. It was the blood slowly trickling from one of the mare's front hooves. The iron horseshoes, symbols of her domestication, had become instruments of torture on that brutal climb. One of them had come partially loose, and the superhuman effort had cracked the hoof underneath. The irony was cruel. The very equipment that protected her in the world of men was now crippling her on the path to freedom. They had escaped the fire, only to be confronted with an even deeper betrayal, coming from the very nature of the animal he was trying to save. He ignored the burning in his own lungs and knelt, his hand sliding down the mare's trembling leg to the hoof. The heat of the blood and inflammation was a feverish alarm under his fingers. There it was, the horseshoe, partially torn off, twisted at a cruel angle, and the dark crack that opened in the hoof like a wound in the earth itself. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow him. A lame animal in the Sierras was a carcass waiting for vultures. But then, fury took the place of despair, a cold, crystalline anger. It wasn't the mountain that had betrayed her. It was the world she came from. The iron, the brand of her servitude, was the poison that was now killing her. There was no choice. He looked into the mare's eyes, a silent plea for an almost impossible trust. With the soldier's knife in hand, he began the brutal work. The blade was not the right tool, and the sound of steel scraping against the hoof and nails was a scream in the night. With every movement, he felt the mare's muscle contract in pain, but she did not pull away. She stood firm on three legs, her body trembling, her gaze fixed on him, enduring the present torture for the promise of freedom. One by one, with an effort that soaked his face in sweat, Nahkoz pulled out the nails and loosened the first horseshoe. He held it for a moment, the cold, dead weight of captivity in his hand, and then threw it into the abyss, where it disappeared without a sound. He had three more to remove. The macabre ritual was repeated 3 times, an act of violence born from the deepest compassion. With each nail pulled, each piece of iron forced loose, the mare flinched, a deep tremor running through her body, but she did not move. Her eyes remained fixed on him, a mixture of pain and a trust so absolute it put the gods to shame. When the last horseshoe came loose, Nahkoz felt its weight in his hand like a shackle that was finally breaking. He threw it after the others, sending the last vestige of Morales' world into the silence of the abyss. Panting, he rested his forehead against the mare's sweaty, warm flank. "It's over," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Now you are free to be what you were born to be." but freedom was a distant promise, and the night was coming to an end. From the abyss, the sound of a shouted order confirmed that Morales was reorganizing his men, preparing for an attack at first light. There was no time to rest. Nahkoz stood up, his aching body protesting. He touched the mare's neck, guiding her forward. Her first step was hesitant, a painful test on the injured hoof. She limped, but she did not stop. And then something changed. Without the slippery metal, the rough texture of her hooves found a new grip on the stone. Her steps became surer, quieter, as if the mountain itself were accepting her back. As the first pale grey light of dawn began to leak over the horizon, they moved upward, a wounded family in a desperate race against the sun. The rim of the canyon turned into a line of golden fire as the sun touched it. That light was both the promise of salvation and the beacon that exposed them. The shouts from below became clearer, more furious. Morales knew he was losing his prize. The sound of Morales's men beginning their own desperate climb, louder and less efficient, was a promise of death rising from the rocks. Nahkoz felt the mare's muscles tremble under his hand, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. He pushed, his body pressed against hers, lending her the strength he barely possessed. With each limping step, her pain became his, an agonizing rhythm that propelled them to the top. The first hoof to touch flat ground was a blessing, a miracle. With one last titanic effort, the mare dragged herself to the safety of the mesa top, and Nahkoz collapsed beside her, his chest heaving, dust and sweat forming a mask on his face. For a moment the world was no longer vertical, but an infinite horizon of dry grass and open sky. The exhausted foals immediately nestled against their mother, but he did not allow himself the luxury of rest. Forcing himself to his knees, he looked back at the abyss they had conquered. Down below, the figures of the soldiers were like furious ants. They had escaped the trap. But as he watched Morales gesturing and pointing to the more accessible trails that led to the top, he knew the hunt had only changed terrain. Their resilience is breathtaking, but the hunt is far from over. Show your support for Nahkoz and his charge in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the outcome of this relentless pursuit. Thank you for following another journey. We'll see you in the next story.